Could you tell us about The Shot Through the Wall and your character in the film?
Yes. Basically, it's about a young Chinese American police officer in New York City who is responsible for accidentally shooting and killing an innocent black man through a wall and everything that follows.
This is your first lead role. Did anything surprise you about the experience? What was the biggest takeaway for you?
Oh my gosh. There are so many, so it's really hard to choose one. Um, the biggest takeaway for me actually was realizing that it seems, I'm still an up and coming actor. And so I don't really have the luxury of, choosing my projects, but it does kind of seem like certain kinds of projects choose me. And they seem to be always ones that are, very relevant to now. I seem to be chosen to play a lot of like real life Chinese Americans. And it's such a huge honor, but also a huge responsibility to be able to tell their story authentically.
Yeah, as Asian Americans, we're often left out of the country's narrative. What has it meant to you to be a part of a project that brings the Asian culture and perspective into this conversation? And is there an added weight to that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole reason why I even started acting. I had a whole life before this. I was an engineer in Silicon Valley, and the reason why we've wanted to do acting was to do something meaningful. And I feel like that doing something like that is very meaningful. When I first started, there was no Crazy Rich Asians, there was no Shang-Chi. And so at the time, it was a big fight for, positive images of Asian Americans, which
Yeah.
was the huge thing that we're trying to break down is, we're always seen as the foreigner and we've got all these negative stereotypes. And so representation was so important to me. And then now I'm realizing that we have that, but the next step past that is inclusion. Um, it's these kind of really gritty, honest conversations like A Shot Through the Wall that will push us from the glossy images of Crazy Rich Asians and Shang-Chi into one where it's uncomfortable. We belong here and we fit in here, and we can't just present our positive side. We need to show how difficult it's been for us to even try to fit into the fabric of America. And I think that conversation of inclusion is where we need to go next. And I'm really happy to be part of that.
Yeah, and you've also talked in the past about how when you were starting out, there weren't a lot of roles for Asians. How did you, during those more challenging times, how were you able to persevere? And when did you start noticing that shift?
That's a great question. Well, um, about persevering, first of all, I just knew that this is what I wanted to do. And I was lucky to have made like a career separate from acting. And so then I kind of was able to support myself already.
Mm.
Um, and then your second part of your question was, when did I notice the shift? The shift happened very dramatically with Crazy Rich Asians. When that first came out, nobody anticipated that it would be a success because there's been a huge track record of, Asian stories not being bankable. And Crazy Rich Asians really busted down those doors.
Yeah.
There's a big part of how we can continue this momentum of telling Asian stories is that the studios and the people in charge believe that people want to see this. And with Crazy Rich Asians, suddenly there's this belief that, oh, okay, people are interested. And so I'm really happy that, we've broken that barrier because it
Yeah.
makes room for these grittier, more honest conversations.
Yeah, something that I think the film does brilliantly is depict the generational nuances between the family, which brings a lot of authenticity to the project. How did you and the rest of the cast approach that dynamic, and what was it like collaborating with writer-director Amy Long?
How did we approach it? So I'll answer that part first. It was so natural. I mean, I'm Chinese American. I grew up in America, in California, in the Bay Area, and there's just nuances to your culture.
Yeah.
Especially, like you go home, you have one face. You go to work, you have a whole other face. You go to school, you have another face. And as Asian Americans, we are constantly, battling these titanic cultures that are so different from each other, and you kind of have to learn double, like constantly those social cues and everything. And so for us, it was so natural for those pieces to just fit in. So it honestly didn't take too much work for us to find that dynamic. And then working with Amy Long, I mean, there's a little anecdote where I first got the script, and at the time is before Crazy Rich Asians. Her name's Amy Long. It could be a Caucasian name, it could be a white name, or an Asian name. And then I was like, oh no, it's another story written by somebody who is an Asian.
Mm,
And then within the first 10 pages, like I was like, oh, this woman isn't just Asian American. She's specifically Chinese, and she's specifically from Beijing. Like that's how well written the dynamic
yeah.
of the characters were. And after working with her, it's just I feel so lucky because to be able to meet and work with somebody that is so talented and yet still hasn't become like popular yet is so joyous to me. Um, because she's able to tell such a timely, powerful, and relevant story, but also tell it with a lot of nuance and empathy.
Mhm.
Um, and she really has something to say. So that takes a lot of balls as an artist. And so, I'm just so honored to be able to work with her.
Yeah, there's so many intricate relationships within the film. Which was your favorite to explore and why?
That's a great question. I will say maybe it is with Taima. Because for a lot of the movie, you don't get to see Mike react a lot with his
Yeah.
father. And so that means there is a lot of creativity on the actor's part to be able to fill that in. And there is, that momentous scene when there's that confrontation. And yeah, it gave me the most freedom as an actor to be able to create like what our relationship was like before that. That way
Mm.
it sets up that scene where he does finally confront Mike, and why does Mike listen and how does he receive it? So yeah, I would say that one.
Yeah, great answer. And then without giving any spoilers, there's so many emotional moments within the film, particularly at the end when your character visits the mother of the man he accidentally kills. As an actor, how do you prepare for those scenes? And what is kind of like the decompression afterwards?
Oh my gosh, that's a really great question. Well, for this specific film, the emotional journey starts from me accidentally shooting and killing someone, and that for me wasn't particularly difficult because right before I shot this film, I was on a TV series by National Geographic called The Long Road Home. It's also inspired by a true story, and in that one, it's similar to Black Hawk Down, where a bunch of soldiers are pinned down during an ambush, and they have to do some horrible things in order to survive. Um, and in that film or in that TV series, I had to shoot and kill some innocent women and children in order to survive that conflict. That experience left this, horrifying mark on me that when I auditioned for this and I had to imagine what it is like to accidentally shoot and kill somebody, it's so visceral to me that I'm still shaking even talking about
Mm.
it right now. And so after having all of that ingrained in my body and then imagining myself trying to apologize to the mother of the person I just killed in cold blood, I mean, that's basically how I got there. And it really wasn't easy, obviously. Um, but yeah, you kind of have to place yourself there because there's a lot of responsibility in telling a story like this, and you want to tell it as authentically as possible.
Yeah.
And that to me is the most important thing. So I try to put myself as close to it as I can.
And then over the weekend, you shared this powerful post on Instagram about the challenges that any filmmakers face, especially when they're
Yeah.
tackling timely subject matter and how it's become increasingly important to experience things on your own. Can you talk a little bit about the effects that has on emerging voices and how we can combat that?
Yes. So basically, our film came out, and our critical reviews are really wonderful. We're at 86% Rotten Tomatoes right
Yeah.
now. But on IMDb, where anybody can just review things, on our premiere day, somebody organized or planned or hired some bots or something and just bombarded us with one ratings. So overnight after our festival run, we were at 8.4 on IMDb, and then suddenly in one night it dropped down to 5.0. And it's kind of horrifying for an indie filmmaker because we're already understaffed. We have no
Yeah.
budget whatsoever. And now to have to try to combat something like this too is it's just really disappointing. And so the only way that we were able to fight it is by telling people that are in our network to see it. There is that temptation of, oh, just rate it a 10, just rate it a 10. But to me, that isn't really the victory. The victory for me isn't so much the rating, it's that people see it and that they might
Yeah.
change from it or they might transform themselves from it. So to me, that is the only way to combat it, is to try to fight fire with fire, I guess. And you know, you try to get as many people that you know to see it. And that's what we ended up doing, but we're still in the midst of it now. So who knows if I have the answer to this.
Yeah, this is such an important film to see. There's so many timely and relevant themes that it tackles throughout. Was there a particular theme that really hit home for you?
Yeah, the primary one I think is, you know, what is justice. The primary topic I think is the one that is kind of conflated sometimes. You know, even with the Peter Lane case, the first and foremost thing is that, you know, being Black people being gunned out in the street is a complete tragedy, and that's a huge issue that we need to solve. At the same time, the other issue is that systemically the police have been able to get away with any form of
Mm.
accountability by saying that, oh, hey, so this one guy did something bad, it's his fault, he's the problem, there's nothing for us to examine here. And I think what this film really points out is that it's the system that needs some fixing. The system is allowing itself to avoid accountability by scapegoating people. And so that to me is two very different issues, and both of which exist right now. And so um, that's what I think the most important issue of this film is trying to illuminate to people, is that I know that we're all angry at each other, but we can't begin to find a solution until we can start talking to each other.
Sad. And final question for you. Throughout your career, you've chased good stories. What's next for you?
That's a great question. You know, honestly, for me, it's whatever I think is telling stories that are meaningful and something that will leave a lasting impression. Something that is, you know, very relevant to now. I feel like, you know, there's this huge tendency now to tell, you know, the hero's journey like superhero films. And those are well and cool and all, they're universal. But a lot of times I feel like they're not really talking about things that are happening right now. The sensitivity of things is something that really makes people shy away from telling things that are very relevant. And I think that's important for every generation, to talk about things that are going on right now with them. So those are the kind of stories I always want to lean into. And especially on the Asian American front, you know,
Yeah.
the world is wide open now that, you know, Asian American stories are bankable. There's so many Asian American pieces of history and those types of stories of how we are baked into the fabric of America that is not being told and has never been told because there was never the chance before. And now we do have that chance. And so that's what I hope to start creating.